right, so I've got a lot of stuff to go through. I think Kristen handed out, or is handing out, paper handouts at the end of this, though. I'm also going to give you a link to download my slides as a digital handout as well. And you'll also have some links and some resources to ways to continue to contact and stay in touch with us and request our assistance, as well as other information. So this statement here I want to start with because it's really the statement behind the philosophy that's behind everything that I do as the director of the PATINS project, and everything I did as a teacher, and everything I did as a paraprofessional. And it really kind of drives everything that we do. So I want to set the stage for everything I'm going to tell you next. And it's really that all students can acquire skills that move them towards what? As educators, what do you think that one thing is? And it may not be the same for all of us, but I kind of think that it is. What's that one thing? What did you say? You got it. That's what it is. So we want to build independent people, and there's lots of ways of doing that, and lots of little pieces and goals that we have to establish and achieve to get to that point. But I think that's the ultimate of what we're trying to do, is build independent people. And if we're not, and this is the part where I sometimes make teachers a little bit upset. So if you do get upset, that's okay. I promise I'll make it better by the end of this. But I think this is the truth, because if on one hand we say that we believe that all kids can learn, then on the other hand we have to also believe that there's a way to teach all kids. And so if they're not, it's because I haven't been creative, skillful, or determined enough with their instruction. And so that's a lot. That's a hard pill to swallow sometimes as an educator. If you've got kids who aren't doing what you think they should be doing, it's hard to say it's my fault. But if I'm the teacher and I believe all kids can learn, then there has to be a way to teach all kids. So it's because maybe I'm not being creative enough, I don't have the skills, or haven't been determined enough, I'm just burned out. There could be lots of reasons. But taking that and accepting it, and then moving forward, coming to stuff like this and learning from people like Kathy Pratt are ways to move forward with that. So these are some questions I want you to think about that will sort of drive the rest of this presentation. How do you know if a learning environment is universally designed? And how do you know if the materials in that environment are accessible to all your students? How do you know if and when AT, or assistive technology, is required to implement accessible instructional materials, or AIM? How do you know if your students even have a need for AIM or AT? And how and when do you make those decisions that are necessary around AIM and AT? And we should all be able to answer that one now. When are those decisions officially made? In the case conference. In the IEP meetings. But the key there is those decisions cannot be effectively made if there's no data collected and nothing trialed and no work samples and things happening before that meeting. And how and when do you find, or where do you find accessible materials and assistive technology? And if in Indiana, the answer to that is the PATINS project. So I'll tell you about how to get those resources from us, and everything through us is at no cost to you. And what about creating your own accessible materials? So I'm just curious, how many of you are at a place where you're creating more materials than you're purchasing? Just one, two, maybe? 2.5? Okay. So the rest of you, would I be correct in assuming that you're still purchasing most curricular materials from a publisher? Okay. That's changing, that's shifting rapidly, and in the last 5 years that shift has become really apparent to us because of the types of questions that we're getting from folks about how to make their materials accessible. So back in, well, 5 to 10 years ago, there was still most curricular materials being purchased in printed format. And there are laws that apply to printed K-12 curricular materials that we can use in our favor to make things more accessible to students who need them in different formats. With the rapid move toward purchasing digital materials from publishers and the rapid move toward creating your own digital materials, teacher-created materials, and open educational resources, there are some really, really big concerns and big problems with accessibility of those materials. So that's a whole nother question in itself. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be a lot of information in a little bit less than an hour for you. So I want to give you some resources to follow up with. If you remember like 1 or 2 things that you thought was cool about the PATINS project and you want to share that with somebody else, but you can't remember it exactly, this link will take you to a 5-minute video overview of the PATINS project. So if you go back and want to share with a teacher or want to share with an administrator, this is probably a thing to send them. So in 5 minutes, you can give them an overview of who we are and what we do. One thing I believe really strongly in is is trying to avoid what has traditionally happened with professional development. And so when we get a bunch of people in a room and we have one person come in from a so-called expert from more than 50 miles away, which is not me because I come from across the street, which is literally a mile and a half away. But the so-called expert comes in from 50 miles away and drops a bunch of crap and leaves. And that's how we do professional development, which the research says doesn't work at all. It doesn't make any lasting, sustainable change to anything, whether it's in education or something else. And so that's referred to as the seagull effect. And so I try to avoid the seagull effect, which is why the bird is up there with the lines through it. And so I think I definitely know the same thing applies to our K-12 classrooms. When we stand in front of a group of people, a group of students in a K-12 classroom and lecture, as opposed to extending that learning experience outside of the four walls of that classroom and outside of those time constraints of the time that you have those students, we get drastically different results. And we've got lots of free tools at our disposal to connect with those students outside of those time constraints and those physical constraints. So I'd like to give you a few right now, and then we'll get started into some deeper content. But one is Facebook. So you can follow the PATINS project on Facebook. We post a lot of announcements and things first on Facebook before it goes out anywhere else because it's fastest and it's most rapidly spreading. You can also follow the PATINS project on Twitter. You can follow me personally on Twitter. I don't tweet a whole lot except on Tuesday nights. And I'll tell you why on Tuesday nights in just a second. When you do follow us and you happen to post anything that has to do with us, do use our hashtag, which is #PATINSICAM. So before we do that, I want to talk about the Tuesday night thing. So last fall, we decided after a couple years of planning and preparing, we decided we were going to do a Twitter chat, a weekly Twitter chat. How many people have ever done a Twitter chat? Just 2, 3, 4? Cool. Anybody want to share what your opinion of it was? Did you love it? Were you completely overwhelmed by it? Yes, no? Were you sweating afterwards? Oh, I'm always sweating afterwards. It's only half an hour long. And I'm literally like, well. So anyway, we decided to do a Twitter chat. For those who don't know what it is, it's a set day and a set time and a set topic. And during that time, whether it's a half an hour or an hour, ours are only a half an hour, and they happen Tuesday nights at 8:30 Eastern Time. There's a moderator who posts questions, and they post them as Q1:, and the question. And everybody who's watching that hashtag, the #PATINSICAM hashtag, sees the questions, and they can post their answers as A:, and their response. And so you're immediately connected to everybody who's participating in that from all over the state, all over the other states in the country, and all over other countries if they wanted to. So it's a really cool way to connect with other people, but it's really fast. It's overwhelming. And so I would definitely encourage you to participate. It's going to happen again this coming Tuesday night at 8:30. But keep a couple things in mind. Don't feel like you have to read every single thing that comes up. Feel like it's okay to let some things go and just read the things that grab your attention. Respond once in a while if you can. If you can't respond at all, that's fine. For your first time, just watch. But if you decide to do it once, commit to doing it 3 times. Because the first time you're going to be overwhelmed. The second time you're going to be like, I can kind of handle this, but I don't see the point yet. And the third time you'll get it. So do it 3 times. So that'll happen Tuesday nights at 8:30. I also want to have you connect to me right now. So if you've got a cell phone that can text to this number, the 37607. So you're texting a message to 37607 instead of to a phone number. And in the body of the text, you're putting my whole name, no spaces. So it's got to have the G in there, no spaces. It doesn't have to be capitalized, but no spaces, and you got to have my middle initial. So I'll give you just a second to do that. If you don't have a cell phone you can text from, but you have any other device, so a computer, a iPad, any sort of tablet that has a web browser, you can go to this address down here and you can participate in exactly the same way. Has anybody used this tool, Poll Everywhere, before? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Okay, good. So this, for those of you who don't know what this is, it's a free tool. polleverywhere.com that immediately turns whatever devices your students have, whether it's their personal cell phones, whether it's a school-issued iPad, a Chromebook, whatever it is, it turns their device into a student response system. So it allows you to do rapid formative assessments with your students on the fly. So you can have questions created ahead of time, and or you can create questions on the fly. So I'm going to demonstrate it here with just a couple of questions. I'll show you how it works. Okay, so the first question is just kind of a fun one. The very best thing about my summer was... And so to respond, if you texted, all you do is keep that same text thread open and send another reply. So put in whatever it is, one word, the very best thing about your summer was, and hit send, and it'll show up here. So you do have to create an account to do this, but it's free. There is a paid version, but I've only used the free version, and I've used the free version since 2007, and it's always worked fine for me. Now I've got this set up so the responses come in as a word cloud. So the more frequent a word comes in, the bigger it will be. So a lot of people like sleeping. Cool, somebody went to Colorado, my favorite place. Nice, so you get the idea. So you can set them up to come in different ways. The word cloud thing is fun for a question like this, but it's not necessarily fun for questions where you really want to see who's with you and who's not. So let's do one more. This one gets a little more serious. The most challenging thing I frequently run into with my students tends to be engagement. Me. Parents. Effort. So while you guys are doing mental health concerns, good one. So while you guys are doing this, I want to mention something that's really important. If you decide this is a cool tool and you want to use it in your schools, this is really essential to remember. When I look up there and I see effort, the first thing I want to do, and if that was you who put that up there, I do not want you to answer this. My first thing that I want to do is say, okay, did you mean effort from you or effort for your students? That's absolutely the worst thing I can do with something like this. So let me tell you a quick story. Several years ago, when there used to be a very expensive version of this where you had to buy the little pods and each student had a little pod and a student response system that was like $1,500 for a classroom, there was one way out in East Indiana, and they had this going, and it was in a social studies classroom. They said, Daniel, you got to come watch this teacher. She's incredible. She's using the student response system in social studies class. Come check this out. So I was excited, went, watched, and she was incredible and doing an amazing job. And like every 5 to 10 minutes, she would ask another question, and students would respond on their pods. She could see how many of the students were with her and how many were not getting it yet. And about the 5th question, a student put up an answer that was just really kind of off the wall. And I don't think the student was trying to be funny. It just didn't get the concept at all. And she made him identify himself. She said, okay, who put that answer up there? And she made the student identify himself. And I thought to myself, that's ruined now. No student in that classroom is ever going to trust her with this system again, because it's anonymous. You can put whatever you want up there, which is so valuable to me as a teacher. You can put your thoughts up there with complete honesty if it's anonymous. But the first time you make students identify themselves, identify their answer as theirs, you've lost that. So keep that in mind. So lack of basic skills, trauma, focus, defiance, disrespect. Okay, shutting down, engagement. Engagement's up there a bunch. So you can see these ones came in as a different way. I could have done this one I have one more, but in the interest of time, let's move on because I want to show you this next tool. So that one was called polleverywhere.com. So I'm going to show you a few tools and a way to stay connected to me, to PATINS project, and to each other, and then I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to talk about universal design for learning. So this is the next tool that I want to show you, Padlet. Anybody used Padlet? I saw somebody get excited. Oh, I thought, oh, it was a sneeze. Oh. I thought you were like, yeah, Padlet. Did you say you have used it?
I just went to a presentation for MWEA, and she had a Padlet full of resources about everything you could ever imagine.
Nice. Well, I'm going to disappoint you because my Padlet's completely empty for you guys. But so the point there is you can use Padlets in all kinds of different ways. She had a Padlet ready to go for you guys with lots of resources. I like to have a Padlet that's empty or mostly empty with maybe 1 or 2 starter questions on it, but as a way for you guys to stay connected to each other and to stay connected to me, and for you guys to ask questions anonymously and asynchronously so that I can look at those questions, I can maybe glance at them during the presentation or right after the presentation, and I can post responses, and I don't ever know who you were or who asked the question. I just know that that was a question that was important to somebody, and you never had to identify yourself, and I think that's really powerful. So if you go to this address, by either typing that into a browser or using a QR code scanner on your device and scanning that code. I don't see anybody scanning. Maybe we should talk about QR codes. So a QR code is that big square thing up there, and it's a square barcode that contains all types of different information that you'd like to put into it. For me, I'll just put that URL, that web address is contained in that barcode. So if you scan that with your phone, with a QR code scanner app, it would take you right to that address. What's the benefit of doing something like that in a classroom? It's quicker, for sure. And what about if you got kids who have fine motor problems? So maybe it's going to take them 25 minutes to type that URL in because of fine motor issues or vision issues or both. And maybe then they get it typed in and it's still typed in wrong, so they have to do it again. So think about what it is you want. What it is you're trying to assess with students constantly. If you're trying to assess their ability to type that URL in, then make them type it in. If you're trying to get them to a place where you can discuss content, get them there as quickly as you can. And so that's a good way to do it. So we'll go there real quick and show you what Padlet is. Okay, so it looks like this. Yours is blank. You can, and this is a free tool as well. You don't even have to create an account for this one, but you can if you want to save your old Padlets. Again, I've been using Padlet since 2007, and it used to be called Wallwisher, and it changed to Padlet. But I've got all the Padlets from every presentation I've ever done since 2007, which is an incredible resource to have. So you can change the title, you can put your little logo there, you can change the background. I just made this background kind of a paper, but to use it, you just double click. And then look what you've got. Look at the options. So you can write a title, you can write a subtitle, but then look what you've got down here. You can have students record an audio response, a video response, pictures, you can attach documents. So immediately with one double click on an empty Padlet screen, students have like 4 or 5 different ways to respond to you. That's definitely fits the definition of universal design for learning. And they can do it from anywhere. So they do not have to do this from within your classroom. They can do this at 2 a.m. if they have a great idea and wake up in the middle of the night. They go to your Padlet wall, double click there, and record an audio recording or something. So you can't, and the question I get here is, okay, students are going to put all kinds of stuff up there that's inappropriate. Of course they are. Of course that's going to happen. You deal with it like you deal with any other behavior, and we move on. So I use the example, this is a blunt example, but I use the example of a student walking into a classroom, taking off their shoe and throwing it at another kid's face and breaking their nose. We don't ban shoes because they're potentially dangerous. We deal with that behavior with that student at that time, and we teach that kid appropriate use of shoes. But when it applies to technology, for some reason, we get really scared and we decide, okay, one kid posted a picture of something inappropriate up there, we're banning Padlet, rather than teaching appropriate use of Padlet. So keep that in mind in general as well. So go ahead and type something in there if anybody's there and you want to try it out. But throughout the rest of this presentation, or if you're on the way home tonight and you think, okay, I should have asked this question and I didn't, I'm going to put it on the Padlet wall tonight. And I'll try to look back here tomorrow, and anything that's posted I'll respond to. But to go back to kids are going to post inappropriate stuff. So if that's truly a fear that you don't think you can handle on a behavioral level, you can turn on moderation where you have to approve every post that comes in before it's posted publicly. You can also have it anonymous, which I see a lot of benefit to, or you can have it so students have to put their names in. I would try to avoid the name thing if you can. Even if you do want to be able to identify students, assign them some randomly generated number so that you know who they are, but nobody else does. So Padlet's another cool tool. Here's one more tool to stay connected to us. I hate to have people sign up for one more email thing, but this one's worthwhile. So this is a monthly newsletter that comes out. It's a digital newsletter from the PATINS project, and it is an incredibly positive thing. And I hate to clutter up your inboxes with more stuff, but this one's worth it. So about once a month, we find a teacher or an educator, some sort of educator, a principal, a therapist, somebody in a school doing an amazing job of including all kids in the curriculum. And they get nominated from their peers or from one of my staff, and long story short, we show up at their classroom, the rest of the building knows, but the teacher doesn't. We show up at their classroom unannounced and present them with what we call a Starfish Award. Which is recognition for doing what they're doing, and they tell their story, and we bring a film crew with us, and we get their story and what they're doing for kids and how they're doing it and what the barriers were and the struggles and how they overcame them, and we get that all on video, and then we show it on YouTube, and we tell the story, and we have the video in this digital newsletter. So it's a really positive thing to get in your inbox once a month. Okay, so let's talk about why this is important real quick. Some data, and if you've already seen this data from previous sessions today or yesterday, tell me, and I'll move on real quickly. But this is the number of students for 14, 15, 16, total enrollment versus special ed. And then this is a little bit, moves a little bit more toward the why. Why is this sort of thing important to include all kids? So the orange line is general education passing. The gray line is special education passing. That's a big gap. That's a big space. Inside the regular classroom, 80% or more of the day across those 4 years. So this is going up, but that's still 29% of kids that are not in the regular classroom 80% or more of the day. That's a lot of kids, a lot of time. This one's scary, I think. Graduation rate. So orange line again is general education graduation rate. Gray line is special education graduation rate. From 2009 to 2015. That's a big gap. This one's a real problem, I think. This is the dropout trend. So the green line with the blue dots is special education. The purple line with the orange dots is general education. So why are more kids with IEPs dropping out of school than kids without IEPs? I mean, I could kind of get on board with a lot of reasoning why kids with IEPs are not passing I-STEP as many as kids without IEPs, but why are kids with IEPs dropping out of school more than kids without IEPs? So this was an alarming piece of research that I was recently made aware of. Gershon Kaufman, a leading psychologist, believes that the level of shame associated with reading disabilities often matches in intensity the shame experienced over incest. I first read that and I thought, that's ridiculous. How could that be true? And then I thought about it. And I thought about it some more, and I thought about it some more and some more, and I thought, that's probably true. So think about it. Every single time a student is in class, there are thousands of opportunities to interact with printed word. And if every one of those thousands of opportunities makes that student feel like they can't do something that they've already been told a million times before they can't do, then that shame just builds and builds 1,000 times in each class period. Then they go to the next class period, it builds again and again and again. They go home, it still happens. They come back to school the next day, and each class period it keeps building. This is a big problem. So I'm going to give you an example in a little bit here, but I'm going to give you a quick one now too. So if you came in here and all the text on my slides was in Japanese or in German or in Arabic or some other language, and all my handouts for you are in the same way, and you were forced to go through these 2 days with something like that you knew probably had some good information on it, and somebody was telling you was important and you should read this, and we're going to ask questions on it later, and you couldn't make any sense of it. Think of doing that every day for 13 years of your life. So let me tell you a little bit about myself real quick. My background is in special education, moderate and severe disabilities in particular. I taught in a K-6 classroom for 4 years with students with moderate and severe disabilities, and led that school's Universal Design for Learning pilot team, their autism team, and their tech team, and their crisis intervention team. And before that was a paraprofessional and a behavior consultant, started a behavioral consulting business for young kids on the autism spectrum. And through all of that time, except for my last 3.5 years of teaching, I was one of those teachers who was anti-technology. I didn't want a computer in my house, I didn't want a computer in my classroom, and I was dead serious about it. I did not want it. I had complete faith in my ability as a teacher and my skills and strengths as an educator and a behavior facilitator, that I thought I don't need any sort of technology. I can do this. And I did things that were so silly, as far as telling someone that I don't want my nonverbal student to have a voice output device because I'm confident I can get them to speak. That is absolutely ridiculous, and I'm embarrassed and ashamed to admit it now. But what happened for me was at the end of probably my 3rd week of teaching, my first classroom teaching job, my 3rd week of teaching, somewhere in there I was completely frustrated. You know, I was making $26,000 a year, and I was there at 6 in the morning. I left at 6 at night. I was there every weekend, and my students were paying textbook rental, but they had absolutely no access to their textbooks because they were 6th grade levels above where they were. And so I really felt like my students were wasting their time, and I was there babysitting. And I thought, I'm not doing this for another year. This is it, my first year, and I'm done. I'm moving on to something else. And I opened a drawer, and in that drawer there was a CD, and it was a pirated disc of stolen software, and it said Co-Writer on there. Anybody used Co-Writer software? Now you're excited. That wasn't a sneeze. Yeah. Okay, so let me finish the Co-Writer story. So it's pirated, stolen disc, and I thought, well, okay, I've got these 6 computers in my classroom that I've been telling the vice principal I want out of my classroom. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go pop this in, see what it is. Popped it in, I realized it's word prediction software. So we all know what word prediction is when you start to type something on your phone and it pops up what it thinks you want to type, and it's kind of frustrating at times, but other times if you get used to using it, it's really useful. So Co-Writer is a much better version of word prediction software. So if I'm trying to type dog, I type a D, and it comes up with 9 choices of D words that I've typed in the past. I can hover my mouse over them and hear them spoken to me. I can click on the one that I want, and it puts it into my Word document or into my email or whatever it is I'm typing. So I thought, okay, this seems like cheating. But then I thought, oh wait, my kids can't spell anyway. They've never written a sentence in their entire life. I'm not sure most of them can spell their name. So I thought, this might be really fun to play with. So kids came in the next day, and I said, okay, we're doing this. You have to write. Here's your writing prompt. Here's what you have to use. We're going to show you how to use it right now, and we're going to write. And of course, they hated my guts. And the paraprofessionals, I had 6 paraprofessionals in my room. They hated my guts as well, because these kids were being asked to do something suddenly that they've never been asked to do in their life. Literally have never written a sentence in their life. 6th graders. So anyway, we struggled through these 2 weeks. I said, let's just have faith in this and let's try it for a little while. We struggled through 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, these kids were writing. Some of them sentences, some of them paragraphs, some of them pages. These are kids who can't spell a single word. They can't phonetically decode a single word. They were writing paragraphs. And so I sat back at the end of the day again, and I thought, okay, this is a serious wake-up call for myself. Number one, I'm allowed to hate computers all I want. I'm allowed to not like technology. I am never allowed to place that preference on my students and what they're able to show me that they know. And so that's a really important thing to remember, because if you work with some of those teachers who say, yeah, I don't need that, or that's cheating, or this or that, you can say, that's fine, that's your opinion, but you are not allowed to have that influence what your students are able to show you what they know. So that's what changed my world, obviously, and I started to embrace technology, and I realized that not only could my kids show me things that they would not ever be able to show anyone in the world that they could do without this assistive technology, I realized that the same was true for myself. So I started to be able to do things that I could not do without technology as well. So that's where I'm coming from. Have you guys seen this in the last 2 days? Okay, I'm not going to spend more than 10 seconds talking about it then. I do want to point out that I want to point out two things. I want to point out the middle. So if you look at this like a bullseye, outcomes is the goal. We get there through equity and access. What's the difference between equity and equality? Yeah.
Equality is giving everybody the same thing regardless of ability, and equity is giving people what they need based on what they need.
Yeah.
One person might not give what another person needs, but it's because they're different.
That's absolutely right. So I'm going to repeat that because what he said is exactly what I would have just said. Equality is everybody getting the same thing. Equity is everybody getting what they need. So if I give everybody Chromebooks, it's equal. But maybe you need an iPad, maybe you need an iPhone, maybe you need a tablet with a much bigger screen, maybe you need a touch screen, maybe you need an audio-only device, maybe you need refreshable Braille. So giving everybody what they need is equity. That's a big difference. And so in education, in the United States, in K-12 education, we have 100 years tradition of trying to make things equal, and if we're not making them equal, we say that we are. We have virtually no experience in equity, giving kids what they need, because for a long time we've been charged with building two separate silos, a general education one and a separate but equal special education one. And we've done that really, really well. We've built those two really, really well, and we're able to say, even though that may not be true, that they're fairly equal. Now we're charged with bringing those things together, which is a really great thing. But we're really bad at it because we have so much experience of building them separately. And so we have to give things in an equitable fashion, which means you may get this device, you may get a different one, you may get a different one, which makes the tech director's job really hard. And so it's not just going to be one tech director anymore. It's going to be 5 or 6 probably. That's a big job, but that has to come, the student need for an equitable experience has to come before anything else. So that's in the middle, that's the bullseye. I like to point that out. The other thing I like to point out is the overarching one on the top that says Universal Design for Learning. Right there. Which for us is the filter, it's the umbrella, it's the lens through which we try to see everything else. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more and tell you a little bit more about that, what that means. Anybody consider themselves a UDL, Universal Design for Learning expert at this point? Good. That makes my job much easier up here. How many, on a scale of 1 to 5, how many 3s? Like a 2.5 maybe? How many 1s? Okay, all right. So here's a little quiz. This is a little quiz that is an important one. This is a high stakes quiz. This is going to determine whether or not you get to stay in this session for the next half an hour that we have left, or if you're going to go with Kristen and Steve down the hall to a very special classroom. You'll get very special instruction down there. You'll be fine. But the rest of you guys who get this question right will stay in here with me, and we're going to have a party. You might know it. It's an easy question. It's a question I'm pretty sure you guys know. You've been taught this so many times. Surely you know this. Oh, come on, it's worth taking a guess at least. Choose C. No guesses? So the question says, it's a real question, it's a real language, it's an Arabic language, and it says, what is a noun? I'm pretty confident you all can tell me what a noun is in extreme detail, and you can probably teach me a few things about what a noun is, if you could decode the question. Okay, so let that sink in for a little bit. It's a pretty blunt example, but it's one that you can put in your pocket and pull out for those teachers who say it's cheating for a kid to listen to a book on the computer. So if I wanted to measure your ability to read that language, then that's a fair question. If I want to measure your ability to tell me what a noun is, that is not a fair question. Does anybody disagree with that? Usually there's one or two. We can talk through that. So keep in mind always what it is you're trying to measure. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a second. But we're sort of simulating a visual impairment with that question, or decoding ability, or a print disability. But the point I want to make here is that decoding the content and responding to, interacting with the content are two very different skill sets. So two very different things. I heard something not this past July, but the July before. I heard something when I was at Harvard that I'll never forget, and it's probably one of the most simple statements I've ever heard, but also one of the most profound when it comes to assessment. So I'll tell it to you now. Any assessment, whether it's a social studies assessment or a math assessment or a driving assessment or a physics assessment, whatever assessment you think you're giving to a student, every assessment is first a test of engagement. So it's a test of how they came to school that morning, what happened the night before, whether they ate, whether they have any interest in that topic whatsoever, or whether it's the passion of their lives, whatever. So it's first a test of engagement. And then every single test is second, a test of reading. And third, it's a test of whatever you think it's a test of, social studies or math or physics. So keep that in mind. Every single assessment you give is first an assessment of engagement. It's second, an assessment of reading or decoding. And third, it's an assessment of the topic that you think it is. So let's talk about modifications and accommodations real quick. These are two important terms that are very different but related, and if they're mixed up, the consequences can be pretty serious. So modification is when we change the target, when we change the goal, when we change the standards. So if we have a 6th grade student who's working on kindergarten standards, that's a modification. And what we're effectively doing when we modify a student's curriculum is we take them off diploma track. And sometimes that's the answer. A lot of times, we think that's the answer because we don't understand accommodations. So on the converse, an accommodation keeps the goal the same way. The standard or whatever, the target is the same. The way you approach it, the way you have students approach it, the way they interact with it, and the way they respond to it vary. So the way you present information to students varies, the way they receive it, and the way they interact with it, and the way they respond to you varies. But the goal is the same. That's an accommodation. So when you're providing accommodations with the goal the same state standards, we're still keeping students on diploma track. We're just letting them get to the content and respond to us in slightly different ways. So when we look into accommodations a bit further, we look into three things. So we've got specialized formats of materials. Anybody have a student who uses Braille? Large print? Anybody have a student who uses audio versions of print? Okay, well, you're in the right session. I hope you do after this. Because I guarantee you have those students who would benefit from that. I promise you do. So specialized formats, and that's the official term, specialized formats of materials are differing formats of the exact same content. So if I have a printed textbook, and a specialized format of the printed textbook would be Braille, or it could be an audio version of that textbook, or a digital version of that textbook, or it could be a large print version of that textbook. We have assistive technology, which are differing ways of interacting with and getting to the content. So maybe you have fine motor difficulties and you're not able to use a mouse. And so we have different types of mouse. We have roller balls. We have joysticks. We have touch screens. Lots of different. So that's assistive technology. And then universal design for learning is the flexible nature of designing your curriculum, designing your lesson plans, and designing your learning environments, the classrooms themselves and the buildings themselves, in a way that's as accessible as possible from the ground up, so that there's a decreased need for specialized formats and assistive technology. So let's look at this. I'm visual, so this makes sense to me. Let me explain these pictures to you, and it might make a little more sense to you if these are new concepts. So on the far left, we've got UDL, Universal Design for Learning. That is a picture of, anybody know what that is? It is the Guggenheim. So it's a bird's eye view looking down of the Guggenheim, and it's a spiral ramp. So the key there, the reason that's there for UDL is that was universally designed from the ground up. It was built with a ramp, because I can walk up a ramp, I can roll up a ramp, I can somersault up a ramp, I can cartwheel up a ramp. I can get up the ramp in a lot of different ways. If it were stairs, I can only walk up those stairs. And then we have to hire somebody to come in and put an elevator or an escalator or a ramp. Instead, let's just build it with a ramp from the ground up, which allows many more people to access it, and we don't have to do the assistive technology or the specialized formats part of putting in an elevator. So that's UDL, designing something from the ground up to be as accessible for as many people as possible without having to do something like have one of us come in and say, okay, let's try this piece of assistive technology, or let's try this specialized format. Let's build it that way from the ground up. So that's ideal. That's the ideal situation. If we move to the middle there, we're talking about the materials then. So the accessible materials have to be part of a universally designed environment. In the state of Indiana, that's the ICAM, the Indiana Center for Accessible Materials. That's where all the Braille, the large print, the digital textbooks, the NIMAS files, the EPUBs, the accessible PDFs, the audio files, all those specialized formats of textbooks, that's where those come from. And those are all free for students who qualify to Indiana Public K-12 schools. You just have to request them. Your digital rights manager in your district has to request them. And so that's another whole training in itself that we're not going to have time for, but just know that you're entitled to that. It's free, and we're happy to help you get there. It's really not that difficult. And then on the far right, we've got pictures of the Band-Aids. That's AT, or assistive technology. Any AT professionals in here? Is that your job, assistive tech? Okay. I ask because I put a picture of Band-Aids up there, and I usually offend the AT people. Like, what are you talking about? It's Band-Aids. It's my job. So let me explain why I put Band-Aids up there. A Band-Aid doesn't go on a whole class of people at one time. It goes on one person, and it goes on one particular injury of one person. That's assistive technology. And it's going to get old, and it's going to fall off, and it's going to have to be replaced. That's assistive technology. But for that time, for that student, for that particular injury, it serves a definite and important purpose. That's assistive technology. So UDL is kind of everybody, trying to cover as much as we can with the spiral ramp, or anybody can use that. A Band-Aid is for one person, one particular injury of one person at one time. So assistive technology is individual. It's for one kid, and it's usually for one barrier at a time that student is facing. So if it's a nonverbal student, the assistive technology for that nonverbal student might be a voice output device, a communication device. If it's a student who can't spell, the assistive technology for that student might be word prediction. It might be co-writer. Any questions about this? Okay. So this is another sort of philosophical statement that I like to make, or really a question that I like to ask. Are you willing, permitted, and able to teach differently, not just teach with different tools? So in 2009, 2010, the iPad came out, and iPads were dropped off at teachers' doorsteps. Everybody thought it was the magic bullet and it was going to solve everybody's problems because apps were free, or they were like 99 cents, and we're all done with spending big money on assistive technology. We're just going to buy 1 million iPads. Did it solve our problems? Do we still have the same problems with kids now that we had in 2008 before the iPad? For the most part, yes. And this is why, and I believe very strongly in this. If you're not willing to do it, if you're not permitted to do it, and you're not able to teach differently, not just do the same thing you've done for the last 15 years, but now on an iPad, but do it differently, then you're going to get the same results. And so the willing part has to do with your attitude, which is I can't do much about that, but you're here, you come to stuff like this, so I'm guessing your attitudes are pretty good, but you probably work with people whose attitudes are not so good. That wasn't a sneeze either, I saw that. The permitted part has to do with policies that are in place at your school districts. And that is something that I used to sort of have the philosophy of, yeah, so what, who cares what the policy is? You know what good teaching is, just do it. And I've really changed my mind about that. I've come full circle on that because the policies matter tremendously. And let me tell you why. When the iPad first came out, I was called and said, hey, Daniel, we're buying iPads for all of our teachers. Can you come during the summer? Can you come in July and train us? And I had never seen an iPad yet. I hadn't got my hands on one, but I said, sure, I'll be there, and showed up in July. And by that time, I had an iPad, and I was ready to go and ready to train on it, and thought it was the greatest tool. And I showed up and I walked in, there's 88 teachers, all with brand new iPads. And above the door that I was walking into to do this training for, there's two signs. One said, 95% attendance rate is our goal. I thought, okay, cool. Let's have kids 95% here 95% of the time. That's a good goal. Right next to it is another sign that I kind of wasn't so impressed with. It said, no devices. And it listed the devices that were not allowed. iPad was in there, and there's a big circle with a line through it. So I thought, okay, at the same time, somebody in this district is buying 88 iPads for their staff. Somebody else in the district is making a policy that says there's no iPads allowed. And so I walked in, I said, guys, I have to address this. I have to say something about this. And they said, oh yeah, we know. We didn't know they were doing that. They put the sign up, we'll change it. It's not a big deal. And I said, it is a big deal because I guarantee you there's some of these 88 teachers that are here right now who don't want to be here. They were told to be here because they were bought an iPad. And that policy gives them permission to maintain that attitude. And with that attitude, they're never going to be willing to do this. So it does matter. And the able part has to do with your skills. And so when you're coming to stuff like this, you're improving those skills. We can help you with those skills moving forward as well. And then it relates to expectations. So if you remember that circle with the goal of equity and access equals outcomes in the middle, one of the big pieces inside in that inner ring in the inner circle was high expectations for all students. And I'm pretty confident about saying the next thing I'm going to say as well, because I'm a special ed teacher. I'm a special ed teacher, a teacher of students with moderate and severe disabilities, and I've been that for 18 years. And so I'm pretty confident about saying this without offending people because I'm one of them. We are really, really bad about this. We think we're not, but we're really bad about having high expectations for all of our kids. And here's how I know that's true. Because we're really good at doing this with our kids. We protect them really, really well. We take really good care of them. Good at doing this, bad at doing and letting them go, because when we let them go out into that general education classroom with the same state standards that their peers are working on, we know that they're probably going to fail. And that's really hard on us because we want to see them succeed. So I think that as special educators, we're actually worse at that than a lot of general educators. I think general educators want to have higher expectations for students with IEPs than special educators. And I know those are big generalizations, and maybe that's not fair, but I know that's true of myself, and I try to be very cognizant of it. So maintaining high expectations for all students, I think the party's over there. Go get him, Steve. No, it's cool. Doesn't bother me at all. So expectations, by definition, are quick predictions that we make about somebody and the value that they're going to add to whatever the task is at hand. And so when we make predictions about students, they're based on a lot of things. They're based on the label that comes on their IEP that we get. They're based on what their teacher last year said. And a lot of those expectations that are based on things that we've really never seen with kids are inaccurate. And so I want to talk about this concept of dignity of risk. Has anybody heard of this term before? Okay, let's definitely spend a minute or two on it then. So dignity of risk. This is something I believe really, really strongly in. It's allowing and expecting yourself and your students the opportunity to explore risk, failure, punishment, well-being, and rejection. So you're allowing them the opportunity to experience those things. I know we often prevent our students from doing this. And it's really hard to say, okay, go try this. I'm pretty sure you're going to fail. But the key there is, okay, as soon as you do fail, I'm going to be right there by your side, and I'm going to grab your hand, I'm going to pick you up, and I'm going to give you the tools to try it again. And we're going to be okay. So here's why I feel so strongly about this. If a student only ever has the opportunity to make the right choice, if that's the only choice they have is to color in this bubble because we've told them to, or to say this word next because we've told them to, then there's no pride in ever making a choice because they don't really ever have a choice. If the only choice they ever have is the right choice, there's no pride in ever actually making the right choice. So really what you're doing is denying that student the opportunity to feel proud, which is a really sad thing. So in order to allow them the chance to feel proud, you have to allow them the chance to fail. So you have to give them the opportunity to say the wrong word. So if it's a nonverbal student and they're using a voice output device, they have to have words on there that are inappropriate to say in class. Because if the only words they ever have to say are the right ones, there's no pride in ever making the choice, because there's no choice. But if there's the F-bomb on there and then there's all these other words, and they have to choose which one to say in class, and they choose the right ones, that allows them to feel proud of the choices that they make. If they choose the F-bomb, we treat it like we would any other student who said the F-bomb in class, and there are consequences. So this dignity of risk concept is a really important one. And I heard somebody, anybody know Daniel Kish? Kristen heard him. So he's blind. He's blind from a very young age, completely blind, and he clicks with his tongue, and he sort of echolocates like a dolphin or a bat. And so long story short, I know we're running out of time. I was kind of thought, yeah, right. And I saw him. I hung out with him. I interviewed him. We hung out a little bit afterwards, and it's absolutely true. Like, he knew where stuff was, and he could tell me we were in the right place or the wrong place, in places he'd never been before. Long story short, he says when he was younger and completely blind, his dad brought him a bicycle home, and people thought that was ridiculous and crazy, but he rode this bicycle blind. And he said he crashed a lot, and a lot of bumps and bruises, a lot of blood, but he said, it hurts running into a light post, but it's absolutely devastating to be denied the opportunity to run into a light post. And I thought, yeah, that's really profound. Like, if your parents said, we want to keep you safe, sit on the couch, or you're probably going to get hurt, we'll be there, we'll put Band-Aids on, we'll take you to the hospital if we have to, get on this bike. Like, that's a really cool thing to do for a kid. And I think with students with IEPs in our classrooms, giving them the chance to do something and seeing where they fail and how they fail, and then giving them the tools to try it again is a really powerful thing. This is the definition of universal design for learning. Rather than reading through this and spending time, I want to show you these 3 bullet points. So if I take universal design for learning and break it down into 3 bullet points, it's these 3. It's providing multiple and flexible ways of presenting information to learners. So maybe I provide it auditorily, I provide it visually, I provide it Padlet, I tweet it, I provide it in audio version, I provide it in a Braille version. So it's multiple and flexible ways of providing information to students. It's multiple and flexible ways of allowing students to respond to us. So they can respond verbally, they can respond written, they can respond typed, they can respond voice to text maybe, they can respond with their communication device, they can respond with a video, they can respond by acting something out or writing a song. So lots of different ways for kids to show us what they know. And it's multiple and flexible ways of engaging students. And for me, that's the hardest one. Like, that's really hard. If you got a classroom of 26 different kids coming to you from 26 different backgrounds with 26 different things that happened in the morning and last night, 26 different interests, how do you engage all those kids at the same time? That's really tough. But what I can tell you for sure are 2 things. There's going to be some kids in there who are into a paper printed textbook, but the majority of the classroom probably are not. And when you say, okay, turn to page 37 in your social studies textbook, probably the majority of the classroom are disengaged immediately. Whereas if you say, okay, let's go to this website, or I'm going to introduce it with this video, or we're going to start a Padlet wall with some information on it, you've probably got some more interest going already. Another thing I can tell you is that if the content is not relevant to their world, it's not going to work. And I usually put a slide in here after this that I didn't this time in the interest of time, but it's a picture of homework that is completely irrelevant, that talks about a dictionary and an atlas and an encyclopedia and an almanac, and it was given to a 4th grade student who got all the questions wrong. And I said, well, how would you know these questions? Did your teacher take you to the library, teach you this stuff? No. And so the questions were not only completely irrelevant to her life, because I haven't had a phone book in my house in at least 14 years. I don't know where I'd find an almanac. So the answer to all those questions were really 2 things, Google and Wikipedia. But those things were not relevant to her life. So you're definitely not engaging students with things like that. I want to show you this tool. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. I want to show you this tool because it's something you can take and use, and it's brand new. So there's a UDL lesson creator that's either on our website now or it will be tomorrow. but it's available now either way. And so what this does, let me zoom into it a little bit here, is gives you some information at the top, and then it walks you through creating an entire lesson plan in a UDL type of way. So you don't have to put your real name in here, but you do have to put your email address, because it's going to email you a Google Doc version of your lesson plan that you can edit down the road. So you title it, it talks about the standards, it talks about the objectives and outcomes for all students, some students, and most students. It gives you lots of connections to project successes, content connectors, and then we go on to the next page. Oh, it's not going to let me go on without filling it in. So it walks you through, long story short, it walks you through the entire process of creating an entire lesson that's universally designed. So it talks about the environmental factors, it talks about how to present multiple and flexible ways for the beginning of the lesson, the body of the lesson, the closing, the assessment of the lesson. It talks about extending the learning experience outside of the four walls of the classroom that you're in. And it's got a space at the end for identifying barriers that you ran into in that lesson that you'd like to have fixed for next time. So then you click submit, and it allows you to go back and make edits right away, but it also emails you a link to your own Google Doc with your completed lesson in a format that's very readable. But because it's just a Google Doc and you own it, you can go in there and change the format, you can make edits to it, it's yours forever. But it's a tool that walks you through that whole process. I'll be honest, it's not a tool that you're going to use for every single lesson plan that you create, because it's too in-depth. So what I'd say is go through this, make yourself go through this lesson plan like 2 or 3, maybe 4 times. And once you do that, you just start thinking along these lines of, these are all the things that I have to consider when I'm creating a universally designed lesson. So resources can go in there, links to websites, links to other tools, software, things that you're going to need like that to make your lesson truly as accessible as possible to whomever walks through your door. So pretend you don't know a single one of your students, and you're going to make a lesson plan that's accessible to anyone that walks in your door. That's universal design. So it's not easy, but that's the goal, and that's a tool that will help walk you through it. This is us. There's 17 of us that cover the whole state. It's not a lot of people to cover a whole state. So if you reach out and email me and I don't email you back in 24 hours, just email me again so that your email gets to the top of the list. Because if I'm doing something like this, by the time I leave here, there's probably 100 emails. And so if you happen to be the first one, just email me again tomorrow and get back on the top of the list. But contact us. Stay in touch with us. We're free to help. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook. I do want to tell you about this real quick. November 1st and 2nd is our state conference. It's all implementation, so there's no vendors. So there's no vendor bias. It's all implementation stuff. We bring in the best national presenters that we find from around the country, and we find the best people from in Indiana to present as well. 2 days of consecutive sessions on that. It's the only thing we do that's not free. So it's $100 a day to come to. That includes your breakfast and your lunch. Registration is open now. It'll be November 1st and 2nd. Our 2 keynotes are awesome, and we're lining up our concurrent sessions right now. We've got a ton of proposals in, and we're choosing those tomorrow morning, actually. So really, just a couple things in closing. This is not my quote, but I really like it. We've got all these great tools. Most of them are free. We've got all these great spices, and we're still making meatloaf in classrooms. We're still cooking with the same old stuff that we've done for 20 years, and we know it doesn't work. We know we want different results, but we're still doing the same stuff. So this is the link to the slides. If you want them digitally, you can scan that, or you can type that into a browser, but they're on the DOE website as well. So thank you for your time. I'm not going to keep you any longer, but I appreciate your time, and feel free to contact me or any of my staff in the future, and we'll be more than happy to help you out.